Coronial court stands assumed. Please be seated. This is today's speech.
Yes, Your Honour. So I just confirming for the live stream. Pasco, you were just discussing you've travelled here today from Maningrida, where you've lived and worked, including about 5 years working as an ACPO. You were just making some acknowledgements when we just broke for a minute.
Yes, I was in ECPO since 2003 in a remote community in Western Arnhem Land called Maningrida, and Maningrida has the size of a population that has nearly 3,500 people, the biggest community in Arnhem Land, and I was an Aboriginal community police officer. In that community as a rank of a constable. And
sorry, Mr. Pasco, just to interrupt you. When I interrupted you a moment ago, I think you were just in the middle of acknowledging and making an argument to.
Yes. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the custodians and the elders and leaders of the country where we have gathered and having this meeting now, and I pay my respect to leaders past and present, and emerging leaders and elders in this community, and I pay my respects to those families who are present here, also as leaders and communities. My name is Ben Pasco, but I am also known as Baru Pasco, which I am also known in the community. In 2003, I was a Aboriginal community police officer in the community of Maningrida in West Arnhem Land. Western Arnhem Land, the Maningrida has the size of a population near 3.5 to 38 to 3,900 people living in Maningrida, just about nearly 4,000 people, the biggest community in Arnhem Land, Central Arnhem Land. And I've worked there as a Aboriginal community police officer, as a rank of a constable with a 3-man station, just an officer in charge, a constable and ACPO, that's all. And my role was to engage with the police wherever there was cultural difficulties in the community, where members didn't know where to go or what to do, or the do's and don'ts in the community, and I had to use that elders hat on to direct them to certain places or certain people or certain clan groups. Maningrida has 12 clan groups, and the languages there are spoken, 12 languages that are spoken. It's a very multicultural community, and it's a big community. And as an ACPO, I was the front line in the community, also teaching the Balanda officers about my culture. And on duty, when we were out on patrols, I had to teach them about cultural awareness. And this is what we do, this is how we address people, and how we approach people, the places that we don't go to or the places that we can go to, and make sure that I said often identify sign languages and body languages in the community, because the community of Menuguru, we practice culture 24/7, day and night, including children. And my role as an ACPO there was very much a bridge builder between the Balanda officers and myself.
And perhaps just, you mentioned there's 12 clan groups and language groups in the community. If there were cultural matters relating to anyone in the community, a victim, offender, or an issue, if it was not something that you could give them cultural information, what would be the process then? Would you engage in other elders in the community, other clan groups?
Yes. If there was an issue in the community where the Balanda police officers attend to residential dwelling or dwelling in the community where there are ceremonial items, for example, I would say, okay, we will direct you to the appropriate Jungai. Jungai is a cultural advisor, manager, or a Jungai, a police officer, cultural police officer, or manager in that clan groups or ceremonial group. And we will direct you to the appropriate Dua or Yiricha Jungai. Yiricha and Dua is just like yin and yang. And these are the people who they could, assist the police in searches in the community if there is an arrest warrant or a person of interest. The police would then be aware that there is a cultural thing that is happening, and then that they would respect that.
And I was going to ask you about that later, but since you brought it up, we were discussing earlier an example of, I think it's what you're talking about now. One of the things Nadia and others have been discussing in this inquest is the idea of developing a model of community policing to guide police in how they can work with the Aboriginal communities that they're policing. And you've mentioned the police were attending a house and there were cultural objects, for example. That's an issue that, in fact, did occur once in Managrita, and we were discussing a solution to that. So I think you were referring to police conducting a search on a house and searching and unfortunately finding some cultural objects that they shouldn't have found. Is that correct?
Yes.
And obviously the police had an obligation to conduct a search on this occasion. Your suggestion in that situation, police are at that house, there's no one's obviously going anywhere, they have to conduct this search as according to their warrant. And what would as a guideline to police coming into this situation, what would be, how could they engage in either as an ACPO or in the community elders to address that without causing offence or handling cultural or sacred objects?
I think maybe the best word I think I can use is that cultural awareness training is appropriate cultural communication, between the Balanda police officers and also the Yolngu residents in the community. That culture is practiced every day and night in the community, and therefore maybe cultural awareness training would be an appropriate area where we could have a look at where Balanda police officers can go through training so that they can get a picture of the cultural framework in the community and get an understanding of what culture is like.
And that example of police searching bags and being told there was objects that they shouldn't handle. If that was to occur and you were aware that it wasn't something you could handle, I think you mentioned as an ACPO or an elder, you would be able to find the appropriate cultural leader that could come in and assist in that situation. Is that correct?
Yes. When the Balanda police officers would search the dwelling or a house or whatever, and there are cultural, objects or symbols or items of sacred significance in the house, then we would treat that as very, carefully, and call in the right Jungai to be able to assist the Balanda police officer to open the baggage full of sacred items, make sure that the items are not being tampered and being knocked around or whatever. That the Jungai, Doa Jungai or Yiricha Jungai is there to assist the police officer.
Thank you. And if I could just pause a moment there. Mr. Greatorex, you've also you've travelled here from Western Australia today to give evidence and to discuss your time also working in the police force in Western Australia.
Yes, my name's Lindsay Greatorex. I'm a Yiganamungal man from the West Kimberley. My father is a saltwater man, my mother is a freshwater woman from the river. I too would like to show respect to the local custodians of the lands that we're on today, the Aranda people, the past, present and emerging young people. It's a privilege to be on their country. I've been here on 2 occasions and I really enjoy coming over. So I'm presently Aboriginal practice leader for the West Kimberley District in Child Protection. Back in 2004, I was appointed the officer in charge of the first multifunctional police facility in Western Australia in the Balgo community. This was as a result of the Gordon inquiry. Sue Gordon was the first Aboriginal magistrate in Western Australia, and we had huge child abuse issues across our communities in Western Australia. I was fortunate that Sue Gordon was on the panel and selected me for the job. I got a sense of the interview that she was happy to see an Aboriginal man apply for the job. I was ready for the job at the time. I sensed I was a senior constable. That week I went to 2 job interviews and I was fortunate enough to jump from senior constable to brevet senior sergeant in the 1 week. And I landed at Balgo, 285 kilometres southeast of Halls Creek in the Tanami Desert. 2 officers, 1 brevet sergeant, young Scotty that was with me, came out with his young wife and an infant. It was a huge task. It was 2 guys looking after the Balgo community of 500, Billaloona community of 200 and Little Mullen community. So we had these three communities to look after.
And just to confirm for those that aren't aware, Balgo's community and Mullen and Billaloona are communities off the Tanami Highway, not too far from the NT border.
Yeah, and they link through ceremonial time, law time. We have huge sporting events. Balgo people across the Tanami Desert into the Northern Territory, Larger Manu, Yuendamu, they'd always come to our sporting events, we'd come to theirs. White man created a border. We didn't have those borders in our times, in our traditional ways, but we've got connection all through law, through that country,
And perhaps just going back a step, you'd already been a police officer for some time leading up to your station, station at Balgo. You grew up in Derby, is that correct?
Yeah, so I grew up in Derby, opposite the Derby police station. We were always on the wrong side of the fence at that time, and as time went on, 2 brothers joined the police service. I did 21 and a half years, my younger brother did 9.
And you were fortunate enough to grow up seeing perhaps the first Aboriginal police officer that you were aware of in?
I was very fortunate to have role models in the town of Derby. I had Big Johnny Birch, who was a 6'4" giant of a man. He was pitch black, and he was our hero. He was the big policeman, and Damon Monado, an older guy. They were the foundation for uploads across the state back then.
What did that mean as a young kid, seeing an Aboriginal man wearing a police uniform? What did that mean to you?
Well, it gave us a sense of security too, that they were there to look after us too, you know.
And you mentioned your brother, your younger brother also.
Yeah, my young
Followed
brother. Yeah, he followed me. And can I just add, I had a white guy across the road at that police station, a big bloke called Lofty. He was a giant of a man too, 6'5". And Lofty had a huge impact on me as a juvenile because I was getting into juvenile strife, and Lofty pulled me aside one day and took me down to the local football training with the men, and that was the turning point for me. It led me off to sporting, and I always think of Lofty as that guy who had that huge impact. He happened to be a police officer.
It's the importance of relationships with people in the community, and positive relationships and role models.
Yep.
And I suppose further to that, ripple effect of yourself and others being role models and having the courage to join police. Currently in Derby, there's another female officer that grew up next door to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's currently Shirley Martin, who's a community officer now at the thing. We had Angelina Portolano up the road. She became a constable. And Miss Rush, she became a constable. Then there was my brother. So our little town did all right. I thought in my era we all became police officers.
And just one thing before I move on. You mentioned when you did some of your training, you soon after went on to Geraldton. We've heard about cultural awareness and other training in your territory police force. Was there anyone that delivered any cultural training when you were training to be a police officer?
So I went through the WA Academy in Maylands in Perth, and at that time, so we're going way back to 1987, 88, cultural awareness was very minimal training. I believe it's changed a heck of a lot now. I think there's a lot more cultural awareness training in WA Police Services at the Academy.
You mentioned in your statement an unarmed man that delivered some of that training, and perhaps an uncomfortable, or I may describe it differently, situation that occurred when he presented.
So I first was exposed to racism within the West Australian Police Service at the Police Academy when a proud old young man came in, an ex-serviceman, and talking about cultural awareness to the class, and a few guys made fun of him. For me, that was the first exposure. And then, of course, when I went on to Geraldton, I seen it on a daily level. Racism within the job, it was quite rife, I thought. But I was fortunate enough to go back to Geraldton and work there for the next 4 years, and I saw a lot of changes. You know, we had that crazy riot in Geraldton where they smashed over $250,000 worth of windows in Marine Terrace. But I was fortunate enough to get involved in a lot of proactive stuff outside my hours in Geraldton, and that paved the way for me to be accepted by the local community, because that wasn't my they weren't my people, and I went from there.
It was important for you to learn the differences between people from the Kimberley, where you grew up, and people in Geraldton.
Oh, absolutely. It's just different. I mean, the people down south, they suffered a lot more worse than we did here up in Kimberley, particularly in regard to displacement, you know, and a sense of belonging. I'm a proud Kimberley man. I can say where I'm from. I know where my grandparents come from. And as an Indigenous man, if I've got a sense of belonging, my sons are going to have that, my grandchildren are going to have that. You've got to have a sense of belonging for you to go forward, you know.
And what did you do to get an understanding of the people in Geraldton?
Well, Geraldton, I went beyond myself. So most of the time I made progress was outside my hours. So it was mainly down at the local Police and Citizens Youth Club, where I actually served 2 years, so coaching young women in netball and young men in basketball and the boxing ring and all that. And I got involved, and that's where things change, you know. I had a young lady one day call me a coconut, And I thought, well, what's that? What's that? I thought it was quite funny, but then someone said it's, you know, you're brown on the outside and white inside. I was quite furious after that, but I continued coaching with the kids, and the same woman came back 6 months later. She apologised. She put me aside and said, "I was very sorry about that." And that was a learning point for me, because I'd realised that I'd achieved something. I'd won her over by doing things that weren't in my JDF.
And Detective Sergeant Schumer, is that the correct title at the moment?
Acting Secretary.
Acting Superintendent. You've worked the Community Police for a long time, including being stationed in Yuendamu. The comments of engaging with the community, Mr. Greerix has said, is it something that's been an important aspect of your policing?
Absolutely critical, yes. Yeah, so I've got 35 years in the police force, or just about. And early on in my career, I was stationed at Yuendamu, and had engagement with Aboriginal community police officers, police trackers, police aides, I think they were called in those days. And, you know, there was cross-cultural training every day. It wasn't a 2-week course, it was daily education. So, yeah, their roles absolutely critical in policing a community, certainly an Indigenous community, certainly a remote one.
And similarly, you one stage moved from Yuendamu to Jabiru. You notice the differences in policing there, or the community you work with?
It was quite a bit of a culture shock, I suppose, going from Yuendamu to Jabiru. It's a vastly different community, and the differences in culture are quite marked. And the territory is very diverse, so there's not one size fits all with regards to culture.
The concept of developing a model of community policing, which might spell out some of the things you've learnt in the many years of being a police officer, is that something, things such as building relationships, learning aspects of culture and language, and we've heard of the community resilience and engagement command, but are there aspects, or are there best practice policing tips that you can think of that would be worth being developed, so that young officers, other than going out and engaging with the community, can get a guide or a sense of how they could work and build better knowledge and relationships in communities?
Well, I think realistically the Northern Territory Police has come a long way in a short period of time with the formation of CREC, which is their acronym. In some ways it's redeveloping skills that appear to have been lost, or at least displaced. But I think CREC's doing an amazing job, and there's certainly many positive people in there, and engaging and incorporating them into daily policing is critical.
Particularly the idea of building on the work of CREC and designing some of those lost practices and skills. What do you see as the importance of involving the Aboriginal communities that police work in, as part of that, as part of the co-designed process?
I confess I'm not sure what sort of formal structure would be required, and I think it's in engagement and development, realistically. What policies are involved with it, I'm not sure. But
well, example for engagement, learning from people like Mr. Greerix or Mr. Pascoe or other people in their community that can talk of what's worked in their relationships with police.
no, I think it's just engagement. It's a matter of working together, and not on odd occasions, actually, often, regularly.
Greerix, just going back to, you mentioned starting work in Valdo, served in the nearby town of Halls Creek, but you're now stationed in Balgo. Yourself and another officer. You started out as quite a busy, tough job. Be able to talk about what improvements occurred or what changed.
I'll just step back to Halls Creek in '91. Juvenile crime was extremely high, found domestic violence out of control, no liquor licensing laws whatsoever, and it was a crazy cowboy town, completely out of control when I got there. There was a guy called Sergeant Colin Murray who pulled me aside one day and said, "Lindsay, it's not about locking your people up, it's about helping them." For me, it was a light bulb moment in my life. He sent me across the road to get involved in the local youth group. I ended up chairperson in that group. I went on to be the chairperson of Gandawambin Wunan, which is a Kimberley regional network of sport and culture. And using those networks, we were able to do heaps of crime prevention. Colin went across and created the Halls Creek Action Group, Advisory Group, got all the statistics from the hospital and the education, and changed all the liquor licensing laws in Halls Creek for the better. He was able to do that at his level. I was able to do all the sport and recreation. We were very successful, went on to win 3 premierships in a row. Understand how easy that would make my job. I formed the Kimberley basketball competition, which has been running successfully for 26 years. But there was a lot of proactive stuff again outside my hours. I was able to take that concept of community policing out to Balgo, but it didn't happen straight away. It was a nightmare in the first 6 weeks. We were working 70 plus hours a week. I had 100 kids petrol sniffing, family domestic violence was rife, and the Royal Flying Doctor was doing U-turns. But the 6th or 7th weekend, I said to Scotty, I said, "We're done. We can't do this anymore. It's not sustainable. 2 guys can't do this job." And 3 men knocked at my door one night at 8:30 and said, "We're here to help." And I said, "Well, how?" And they said, "We want to be wardens." So at that stage, I said, "Tomorrow morning, I'll have you appointed, warden 1, 2 and 3. The inspector agreed. The CEO, Noel Mason, was awesome. He said, "I'll get the funding for you." I ended up with a troop carry. They had uniforms, radios, notebooks, pens, coffee, tables, chairs, everything. I ended up with a team of 12 people. They were allocated across the 3 groups. We had top camp, middle camp and bottom camp. I had lawmen in there who were very significant, and I had young men in there and I had women in the group. And I can tell you...
Just to ask you, you mentioned top camp, bottom camp.
Yeah.
Different family groups reside in those parts of the
Yeah,
community.
different, you know, like you'd have the bottom camp, they'd come from, you know, Well 33 area, and you'd have top camp, they'd come from Yaga. So they were collectively placed in these camps, you know, camp 1, 2 and 3 sort of thing. And it was important that we had them inclusive. But when those 3 men knocked on my door that day, that was a community saying, "We're here to help and we've had enough." You know, the mums had had enough of family domestic violence. The kids weren't going to school. I was chasing 100 kids a night on petrol, and they decided to help. And it was a turning point for Balgo because I was able to then spend time training with them. We were able to do heaps of proactive stuff. But it was them coming up with the solutions, and they were telling me what the issues were. And the intelligence I got from them was incredible. So they weren't policing officers as such. They weren't making arrests. They were eyes and ears. And they were with me. If I was going to a job where I thought I'd be at risk going with me and Scotty, I would have two of the wardens come with me, and they would do the interpreting, the talking, and make my job so much easier. So having them on board was incredible. But at the same time, we were working together. So I had a magnificent CEO, I had a health manager, the principal. We're all working together. The Catholic Church joined in with their youth workers, and we were able to do everything. So, but you got to understand, same old story. Please stop doing things for them and show them how to do it. So when I ran a blue light disco, I sat back and watched them do it. They run the DJ, they run the dance events, they run the barbecue. I sat back and watched them just oversee it all. And so they gained ownership of the issues and the solutions. And that's why the community, after that initial 6 months, we were humming. You know, we went on to win a football championship, the Coronial football championships with the desert team, which people used to laugh at me when I first turned up there. We won the championship. So, and then there was a sense of pride in that community. because we're doing it. And even the football training, with all the skills and knowledge I had, I would let their men come in and do it, and I'd whisper to them, you need to tell them this or that. So, yeah, it's about empowering local people. So if I didn't have that warden scheme, the next best thing for me would be to have an advisory group from the local people to at least talk to. That's what I would do in the absence of a warden team.
You were perhaps known to some extent by people from Balga who the nearest township being Halls Creek, where you spent some time. Are you aware of how come it took for yourself to be stationed there for those men to approach police? Do you think someone that they may have been familiar with from nearby, being a Kimberley man, being an Aboriginal man, do you think that made a difference to their trust?
Oh, look, of course it is, you know. I had an elderly woman there come up and give me a hug and call me grandson, and I had no clue who she was. You know, she related back to my grandmother, who was a Nigina woman, several hundred kilometres across towards the Fitzroy River, and she related my grandmother to her. So it was sort of acceptance from that one family group that you're one of us. But although, you know, I didn't know the tribe at all, the only knowledge I had was the association when I was working in Halls Creek. But I can tell you, being Aboriginal was so much easier because we talk different, you know. So when I sit down and I talk to the old man under a tree, I can talk that Creole. I may not talk Gugaja, but I can talk Creole, and I use a lot of humour in my talk, and we can communicate. I know the signs, I know the cues. Now, it was a big learning point for me, I can tell you. And I can understand how big a learning curve it is for white constables to turn up to these communities to learn. But, you know, it's very, very important that if you've got APLOs or you've got police aides or whatever, their role in all of this is essential to pass that learning on to these young constables going on to remotes.
Can I just ask, you said if you didn't have the wardens,
Yep.
You'd have an advisory group.
Absolutely, because
Tell me a little bit about what that might look like and how they might advise, or how that communication would occur and how you develop such a group.
Yeah, so I'd be looking at whether it be fortnightly or monthly. You know, form an advisory group, a group that's going to be able to share what they think the solutions are, rather than you assuming what the issues are, and giving them an opportunity to come up with finding solutions. So again, it's about building that respect in the community and saying, well, let's go find a representative from the health, let's find one from the youth centre, let's find a representative from the education, let's go find one in the men and women's groups. And that's what I'd be doing, because it's very difficult to be working in a silo on your own, but it's far more effective when you're working together. You know? And my suggestion to any OIC, whether it be in a police station or a remote community, don't hesitate or don't be afraid of going out there and forming these advisory groups. To be there for your eyes and ears to actually what's going on in the community and what is their sense, what is their perception of what's going on, instead of, you know, police officer just assuming what the solutions are.
You've mentioned the eyes and ears of your wardens group in the Northern Territory. Naja has a legal education team that works with them and does some legal training for the night patrols, community safety patrols, similar to your wardens. One issue that's often raised with those groups is them as first responders, their ability to make contact with the local police station in their community, and then the delays and challenges of dealing with a call centre in Darwin or perhaps Alice Springs, rather than being able to reach out to their local police. What was your relationship after hours with your wardens? Were they able to contact you? Did they have to go to a call centre in Perth or elsewhere?
No. Look, we soon realised that I would have to split my shifts. I realised I then had to be flexible. I wasn't a police officer that said I don't work after 4. I realised I had to split my shifts, particularly in the first 6 months, because we had tasks at night to stop the alcohol and drugs coming in. We knew which parts they were coming in, so it made sense. I'd often put Scotty on day shift. I'd work in the afternoon if required with my wardens, and we'd be sitting there waiting, bank and robbers waiting for them to come up the road with the alcohol and liquor. But it's it's the flexibility. You have to be flexible when you go out to a remote community. And the fact is, they could come and knock on my door. So I was a police officer that had no issue with them knocking on my door at 24/7. But of course, it was only if it's urgent. Don't come and see me if it's trivial stuff. Come and see if it's urgent, and that's fine. And I responded, and they had the confidence that they could knock on my door, and I was going to answer.
Similarly, could they call you if they needed to?
Absolutely, they had my mobile phone.
Acting district, sorry, Mr. Shoemaker, perhaps, I see you smiling and nodding to that, comments about being flexible and working. Is that your experience basically in the
Well, my knowledge is quite dated, I confess, and my experience is dated with working in remote communities. But that was pretty much the way in which we operated. I can remember when they first started patching the phones through to the call centre in Alice, and then there was certainly a disconnect that they'd make decisions elsewhere that we might not have made locally, having a better awareness of the environment and the community that we lived in.
And similarly, that call centre is
Now, there's not one in Alice, there's only one in Darwin. Yeah.
And to your knowledge, does that include for medical emergencies and that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, I know it does in the urban centres. I confess I'm not sure with regards to remote communities. I think the AAA line goes through the town.
Mr. Pascoe, just on that point of confidence that the community placed in Mr. Greatorex, seeing an Aboriginal man in uniform, you've mentioned in your statement some situations that potentially sort of ended in disaster or police having to use force or take firearms. Mentioned an incident in Ramagini where you attended with police, and which included, I think you said, some situation of shooting or violence that you had to attend to.
Yes, when I was an ACPO, we have gone through certain trainings like in the police force. I know that when I was in training in the police force, that whenever I confronted situations like this, because ACPOs, we didn't have guns, we only had bats and handcuffs. That's it. The Balanda constables, the Balanda police officers had weapons. They were armed with weapons as blocks and pepper spray and whatever. But ACPOs, we were only allowed to carry batons and handcuffs. And in a situation where in one of the trainings where I did in Darwin was when if I was confronted, a big fella, twice the size of me, what would you do? If you had no weapon, what would you do? The hand-to-hand combat was okay. We were trained in hand-to-hand combat. We were trained in the use of firearms, but we didn't use firearms in the community because we were not allowed to use firearms in the community. The only powerful weapon that we had to use in the community was our tongue, our language. Our language was the powerful weapon that we used. And on that day, when we went to the lawless community in East Arnhem Land, a community called Ramangini, and there was conflict between the two clan groups, and actually me and the constable we were in the middle of war, between the two clan groups, and we were, overalls, coveralls on that day. Police vehicle, youth. We crossed over the Black River to Ramangini community. When we got to the community, there was fighting everywhere. There was, families, countrymen, people, armed with offensive weapons like machetes, star pickets, even shovel nose spears,
You
and
mentioned at
anything.
some point some of those people recognised you, and that made a difference. In your
Yes,
situation.
when we got to the community, we pulled up on the side of the road just next door to the old council office at Ramangining. And when we stepped out of the car, me and the constable, in a coverall uniforms, we noticed that there was shouting, screaming everywhere. And we looked on the right, and when we looked on the left, we saw this young fella, a young teenager, bending the spears when he hooked the woman into the spear, ready to throw at us. And I said to the officer, "Do you know how to dodge a spear? Shovel no spear." And he said, "No, if I jump to the right, you gotta jump with me to the right. And if I jump to the left, you're gonna have to jump with me to the left. If I jump to the right and if you jump to the left, you're dead. This is it because he's gonna throw that spear at us." But we were very lucky that my other family members, Pesca family in the community, shouting at him, "Don't you do that? That's one of our families, our brothers. That's our cousin there." So that was one thing good when I learned when I was in that community, that because my father is Kupopingo, he was a Dawala man, and his great grandfathers come from further up Miwach region. And my mother, she is from Estanam, and she spoke Kinang language. And I have that balance between two, language and culture, the Northeastern culture and the Western culture. And I had that feeling that when my presence was in the community, that the Ramangining leaders and elders said, "Stop, we have somebody here with us. He is one of our family," and that was a good sign. And we spent the whole afternoon there talking to each of the leaders and each of the elders in the Dua language group and also the Yiricha language group. And that was one thing good, that because they saw us, we were just dressed in coveralls. We didn't have anything on us. Stop the car. "How are you, Mob?" Just sit down there, talk.
When you say nothing on, no weapons.
No weapons, no weapons. We was there. The communication we had was just cultural communication between our mouth, just words. The words that that I say is probably one of the powerful weapons in the community in the world, is just words,
Right.
without weapons.
And I'll just ask you briefly about another incident, just conscious of the time. We've heard evidence in this court about Derek Williams having using his skills to arrest people in his community, and in particular Kumanjayi Walker. He described his method of arresting him as slowly and respectfully, I think were the words he used in interacting with the young man or anyone to try and arrest them, and that being a successful way rather than having to be quite upfront and use force. You described a situation where you attended an incident in a nearby outstation to Manangrita, which could have ended quite badly. It involved a male suspect and his wife who'd been killed, and police being at the ready and possibly needing to use firearms to arrest this person. But you described how you successfully resolved that situation, and this man coming with you in the police vehicle. Are you able to describe why you managed to succeed in peacefully arresting this person in a quite serious situation?
Yes, just like what I said, cultural communication is very, very important. That we use in the community to communicate between different language groups or immediate family or family members. On that day, we had a call out to a nearby homeland outstation. There was an incident there between family members, and we attended the disturbance there. And there was myself and a constable, and we attended the disturbance. When we came to the outstation's homeland, we heard that one of my cousins had passed away, and my other cousin brother was inside the house. He was armed with an offensive weapon, and once when we got to the homelands, I said it would be a good idea if I would talk to him, tell him
So
about.
those other officers spoke with you when they were formulating that plan?
Yes, the other officers who was with me were along the trip with me to the outstation, and we had plans that they were going to arrest this person and put him in the back of the paddy wagon. But the information that we received from reliable sources, especially our family members, that there was a weapon inside the house. And when I got out of the car, I kindly spoke, come out, we talk together, don't try, to use that weapon because there's a weapon pointing at you. And we try to solve this the better way, the culturally appropriate way for him to surrender. And I think that's one of the important stuff and an issue that I used to communicate with my cousin, culturally appropriately way for him to come out, let me talk to him, what had happened, what did you do, you're gonna have to the consequences of this is this is a serious offense. We're gonna have to take you back to Maningrida with us. And he complied, and he said okay, willingly he complied and to be arrested. And I said that was one thing good that I saw, that cultural communication was the best thing, the best source that I could use without the officer using weapon against him. And I told him that if we arrest you, I can put you in my truck and we can go back to Maningrida and place you in custody until the air wing comes and picks you up to take you down for court. And so culturally appropriately way is probably the best powerful weapon is your tongue, not bets or guns.
Mr. Gradex, you've had incidents where you've been confronted with angry, hostile people in the community. Two things, you able to describe how the assistance of senior lawmen and the wardens helped you, but also your experience of when you didn't carry firearms in the role.
Yeah, so generally, whilst a police officer in Bago, I didn't wear a firearm unless I got intel that I needed to, or I had a sense that I'd feel a lot more secure wearing it. So, but whoever come and relieve at the police station, I never made it mandatory for them not to wear it. It was still their choice. But I'd get comments from the local people. Hey, why are you wearing a gun? What you got that on for? So I picked that up pretty early on when I first started.
You had access to guns in your vehicle?
Yeah, and our vehicles at the time, they had a gun armoury there, so you could safely secure and lock them in there if you needed to put your Glock in there or whatever. But I recall an incident up at Top Camp. I knew who I was going to, 6'4", strapping young fella, very, very aggro on the booze, just belted his wife. I knew I couldn't do it on my own, or Scotty, my partner, so we got two elders. One of them, he was an outstanding warden for me. He was my shadow. He was everywhere. I wouldn't have been able to do my job without him. He came with me, and the young guy came up with a big steel bar. He wanted to have a piece of me. He was in a rage, And my warden just walked over there, spoke to him in language, grabbed his hand, grabbed the bar off him and casually walked him over to my car and put him in the back of the police van. That was a perfect chance where I didn't have to overreact, I didn't have to reach for any weapons, I didn't have to reach for any other option then. My warden will do this. And they did it peacefully and it was a good result because he was still the same bloke that was going to come up the footy training the following day. So the relationship continued, you know, but I had many instances where I knew I was going to what I thought was a danger, because you've got to always remember when you're on a remote, your backup's several hundred kilometres away or many hours away. So I was fortunate to have these wardens and I would always bring them with me. You know, I'd jump in the car and I'd get my old mate Kumanjayi and say, jump in bro, we're off to a job and you come there, you know, this mob, they'd talk language. I didn't talk the language, I didn't know what they were saying, but having them there was just so much easier.
At some stage you left your position in Balgo.
Yep.
You still stayed in touch with people from that community and kept in contact with them.
Yep.
That you still do today.
Yep.
Was there any changes in policing and the use of wardens when you left?
Well, the next OIC came in and said he didn't require wardens anymore, so there were no more wardens. You know, my old mate Kumanjayi, his first duty as a warden every morning was 7 o'clock at the store to ensure the school kids weren't coming in, and he'd chuck them in the van and take them across the school. That was the start of his day, and for him that was his pride and joy. That was his place in the community. And then later on, 2 o'clock in the morning, he'd be alongside me, stopping a car. You know, so it gave them that sense of opportunity. But so just go back to your question.
Sorry, and just how the community, whether there were changes in the community.
Oh yeah. So the guy that came in after me basically said, well, the story I got from the local people was we don't work after 4 o'clock, so there wasn't that flexibility. If you like to bring grog and drugs in, you just bring it in the night time, and if the police officers choose not to work, it's too easy, isn't it? But you do that and you're at the Balgo store, I can tell you at 7 o'clock, because they're all there and it's chaos.
And you had your wardens were some of them were described senior lawmen and young strong men from various top camp, bottom camp, the various family groups, working together. Unfortunately, is it the case that when that warden scheme broke down after you left, that there was often conflict?
No, well, yeah, because you don't have that relationship anymore. You don't have that direct contact to those family groups. If you haven't got those wardens working for you, it's very difficult, particularly if you don't know those people. I know that the OIC that followed behind me, he didn't have that relationship with these people.
And so you went from having these leaders in those various family groups in the community working together, supporting police, to those same family groups.
Most importantly, in all the proactive stuff and all the community policing, they were there to the front, and they were so integral. I would have loved to have had what they had as Brother Boy he was saying, you know, the outpost. We didn't have them. We had Aboriginal police aids stationed in towns across Western Australia, and we had many of us, but we didn't have them at community level. And you know, my vision at that time was I'd love to have 2 at Balgo, two at the other communities, the bigger communities across the Kimberley. You know, Bidjadanga's got 700 people, and they've got a multifunctional now. But it would have been great to have ACPOs back then in my time on communities, because once Lindsay, the Aboriginal sergeant, left, there was no more Aboriginal worker at that remote community.
And you described your first experience coming for a visit to the NT and learning about ACPOs.
Yeah. So I come over here and we went to a few police stations and spoke to a couple of ACPOs and senior officers, because we came over with an idea, you know, well, let's have a look at this. What can we do? Can we introduce it back in Western Australia? And unfortunately, that project didn't get up and running.
Right. At one point in time, across WA and certainly in the Kimberleys, there were a lot of outflows at multiple police stations. then they weren't able to describe the policy changes that had occurred.
Well, in 2001 Sunday, I was the senior officer on shift at the stage. I was an acting sergeant. A white tourist came up to the front counter and was looking around for a white police officer. They were all black. Because I had another Aboriginal constable with me and 3 APLOs, and it was like that. But, you know, that was fantastic back then. We had APLOs everywhere. And then the police commissioner, not mentioning any names, chose to send all the APLOs to the police academy to become constables without a transition program, without consulting senior Aboriginal staff. I was never consulted. And he sent them all off to the academy. It was dismal. They left en masse, and they left the police services. A lot of them ended up working for the mining companies. We lost years of experience. And it was sad watching that happen.
And that was between 2005 and 10. Do you remember what year that changed?
That started around 2000, just after 2000, I think. And when they made that decision to send them off to become a constable, what they should have done is identified who wanted to go. Let's encourage them and push them through. I had guys come back to Halls Creek. They had 1 stripe, 2 stripe, even 3 stripes, and they weren't up to that responsibility. They weren't happy with that.
And you able to describe some of the reasons why you think some of those APLOs left rather than try and go through the mainstream process of becoming?
They were happy being that link. They wanted to be that link. They didn't want to be the guy that had to do the custodial report and you know, do major investigations and that sort of stuff. They didn't join the job with that. They wanted to be that liaison officer, that link, and teaching young officers coming into the job, you know, this is how we do our things up here in the northwest. So their duties changed when they came back as a constable, and they weren't happy with it.
I think you've also mentioned for some of them, whilst they might have had a lot of community connections and cultural knowledge, maybe not the same literacy, that might have been one of the challenges of progressing beyond an APLO role.
Yeah, look, a lot of them had issues with literacy, so, you know, writing up an extensive report on an incident or burglary or putting a brief together was very difficult for a lot of them. So they weren't at that right level to actually go on to become a constable, but they were still pushed to the academy to become a constable. So it was a very, very awkward time for a lot of them.
Had you been consulted by, if you had been consulted by the Commissioner at the time, what would your advice have been?
Well, I would have said, well, have you got a period where the men and women who want to go to the academy come up with a plan and transition them across, not just go chop. You all have to go and place pressure on them. So yeah, where's the plan? Where's the consultation with your senior staff? You know, is it a good idea?
Was there any consultation that matters with the Aboriginal officers like yourself, or with APLOs on an organised, coordinated or regular basis?
None that I know. No. You know, like the APLOs across the state, we'd never get together. We'd never have a conference once a year or whatever, and that should have been the case.
In contrast to your role now in child protection.
Yep.
Aboriginal practice leaders meeting regularly.
Again, child protection has only just caught up. So last year we had our first face-to-face Aboriginal employee network. We had several hundred of us turn up in Perth. That's now going to be twice yearly. And that's the first time a huge government organisation get all Aboriginal staff to meet together in a forum, which I thought was just fabulous. It's a big expense, but you know what, it's money well spent.
Do you think something similar within the police force?
Oh, absolutely.
Assist in
I would recommend APLOs or Aboriginal police meeting once or twice a year in a forum to discuss the matters. Why not? You know, this is their country, this is their local custom. Why not get together and ground through all the issues and on how they can improve their policing and their relationships? There's certainly nothing wrong with that. Don't come up and say it's a financial cost that can't be done. It's money well spent.
You think that will improve recruitment and retention?
I think so.
you had a proposition to someone senior to you within the police, an idea of a training project, which was not
No.
that. You able to describe what
I
that
was in South Headland. I went and spoke to an inspector, and I suggested that I would like to have a portfolio of looking after your APLOs within the region. I would like them to have projects and programs and get them to be actively involved, because I had a sense that some of the police aides were just seen driving around and walking around the park, and you often raise questions and ask, who's responsible for these young men and women? What duties are they done? Are they accountable to the people? And I wanted to run that project because I felt that I could come up with programs that could be applicable and appropriate for where they work, and get productivity from them, rather than just a sense of the OIC's ticked the box, he's recruited his APLOs. So my thought was I would love to be involved in that, and the response from the inspector was it's a black thing. A few weeks later I put my resignation in. I basically had enough, I moved on. I went back home to Derby in the West Kimberley, and I changed my career pathway. But you know, the journey as a police officer was awesome. I learned so many things out of it. I got heaps of enjoyment out of the job, and it was incredible. It was an incredible journey.
And just to touch on your skills, not only what you've done as an officer, and your skills in being able to train and develop APLOs and another police, you at that time had already spent a secondment over in East Timor, which involved training local people to become police officers.
Yeah, 1,200 people applied for a job in East Timor, Timor-Leste. 3 of us were appointed. Station commanders was my position, to train up local East Timorese, literally rights fighters, how to run a police station. Most enjoyable job that was. It was incredible. Poorest people on the planet Earth at the stage Timor-Leste were, but they had a sense of community. It was incredible. They were proud of their young men and women who were police officers, and such a short period of time in my life, but it was 6 months. It was awesome.
So sadly you weren't able to use that international experience in this proposal to train APLOs.
I thought the West Australian Police missed out on a big opportunity when I proposed that.
When you left, following that, was there any exit into you and any attempt to try and get some of your knowledge, or try and keep you there, or find ways of learning the lessons as to why you
I didn't even get a phone call. I didn't even get an exit interview.
And perhaps just touching on perhaps vision that I think everyone here would appreciate. You were lucky to do a police exchange program and went over to Canada, and be able to describe what you've seen in that police station, in that community that you worked out with Indigenous people there.
My dear friend here, I've just met him yesterday. I introduced myself to him yesterday, and he's, oh my God, you're the bloke, you're the man.
So you, I said, oh, so you're the bloke I've been looking around for. Now I find you. So you're the one who went to Canada, because I didn't want to go to Canada. Otherwise I would freeze to death, because I come from a hot weather, you know.
So basically, what I think happened was that Dave Brady, who's Dave Brady Productions from Canada, must have obviously rang Northern Territory Police would like an Aboriginal to do an exchange Canadian thing. So he said no, so they rang Johnny Birch, who was a police aide up in Halls Creek, and Johnny, oh no way, I'm not going to do that, I'm too ashamed. And so they rang me, and I said, yeah, I'd love to, thanks. But you know what? Thanks to Brody.
No.
So, yeah, and that Canadian trip was an eye-opener. They're years in front of us, you know, with their treaty. So I went to Wickwacnicong Village, Lake Ontario Province. They run their own affairs. The first incident was meeting Diane Nadjawan. She was a Canadian Indian native. She was a sergeant. She was awesome. She was really cultural too, you know. And I went to a service station. It was all Indian staff. Straight up, wow, there's no white people running this police station, on this petrol station. And then I went on to the board, the council, the schools, the education, they're all Indian. And there's 95% of teachers at the school, and it was a big school, it was around 1,000 students. And the reception I got at that school was just awesome. And I walked away and said, wow, I wish this was like back home. Then I walked into the police station, and they were all Indian. It was just incredible. It was like, wow, you're running your own affairs, you know. And they had the same issues as us, but they didn't have community policing. I was very surprised because back home, community policing was just starting to evolve and get rolled out. You know, we were doing proactive road safety stuff and giving out Section 66 licensing to the Tanami Desert and the Dampier Peninsula remote people, you know. It was, community policing was just starting to rev up. And here was Canada, and she was so surprised that we went to the schools and we did Blue Like Disco. She said, oh, we need to do this. So she learned big time on our community policing, you know. And I walked away going, oh, gee, maybe we're 40 years behind these guys, but you know, they've got the same stolen generation as us, and they spoke about that. So that was really, really intriguing to see how that rolled out over there. But it was a pleasure to go there. You know? It was a life change, it really was. And the snow was deep, and it was minus 15 degrees. I had to wear long johns, you know. It was a good experience.
Just perspective, Mr. Pascoe, you had to put on an extra shirt this morning.
Yeah, just to adjust my body temperature because Menunga right now is pretty warm up there. It's raining compared to the weather down here, you know. So this is the extra shirt that I wore. I got 2 shirts at the moment.
Mr. Pascoe, you left police in about 2010, is that correct?
Yes.
Something else that's involved in the justice system, in the work that you and some other community leaders do, involves the Bunawara Law and Justice Group, which is the shirt you're wearing now has something to do with that.
Yeah, 2010, I left the police force to journey on to another career, and the career that we had in the community was that what if we had formed up some kind of cultural a justice group where that families and people can access to the services so that they can assist us in writing letters to the presiding judge, or if the police needed assistance. Sometimes in the community of Menunga, we have big rights. They're like, port keys mob, and they come knocking on our doors and say, are you guys available to come and assist with police? Wherever police need us, sometimes, we're there to assist them. Especially in cultural matters like that. Some of the new police officers, the new ones who just come straight up from the woodworks and don't know what community is like, then we direct them the do's and the don'ts and do a little bit of cultural awareness with them.
We've also heard from last week some elders from the Coronial Law and Justice Group in Lajamanu. They gave evidence in Lajamanu by a video link. You're familiar with Kumanjayi, in fact, whilst Bunawara provided a written statement in the Integral Commission, some of your fellow elders, Bunawara elders, gave evidence similar to this on a joint panel.
Yes.
Some of those Albury elders, is that correct?
Yeah, I think I do have a photo of Kumanjayi and 2 members of the Bunawara Justice Group resolution elders at the Royal Commission, and one was a young female named Marcian, and one bloke name was Lion King, because he had the beard, the mane of a lion. So we call him Lion King. So he was the one was at the Royal Commission the statement that we put in to the Royal Commission about a little fella who the case was successful and we brought the little boy back home.
And that involved, and Her Honour's familiar with, at least to my knowledge, familiar with the cultural reference letters that Kumanjayi write, Bunawara similarly writes letters for people going to court, and you're referring to a letter that was written for child protection matters?
Yes, child protection matters, and including writing letters to the presiding judge. Because in the communities, when judges come to our communities, they don't know who the person is, so we have to illustrate a picture of this person to tell that story to the judge about what he eats or what he's good at and the things that he's done from the past and that he's good at, and just that the person who he is, and that's how we I remember my old friend who's retired now, the judge. We've been working together for a long time, sharing that information. We've been learning about Balanda culture, and the judge has been learning about Yumo culture. I don't want to use the terminology Aboriginal because I don't like the word Aboriginal, because you know what the word Aboriginal means? If we put normal is normal, and if we put the AB, the abnormal, it's not normal. And so the terminology that sometimes I use, when Balanda tell me that I'm Aboriginal, I said, no, you are Aboriginal, I'm the original. So we begin to sort of share the information. The previous judge, and he shared a lot of information, what we've been learning today, how to write the character reference support letters, and even working with the intake courts, the Supreme Courts, and including the past Royal Commissions, and that was a great success with one of our justice group from Menengrida. We've been working with the Hamburger, with the lot, including the NT Police Force, to sit there, talk to them, sometimes invite them to come to our ceremonial meeting or dancings. That's where the NT Police officers get a bit of a taste of our culture, so that that they understand the ropes and the do's and the don'ts. Like these young fellas who comes straight from the woodwork, they're just in the community full of sharks and hammerhead sharks. Where do they go? How do they fit in? So that's where we in the community, we try build that bridge together, so that we can do community engage better, to perform better in the community, without any wrongs or whatever. And that one, the Bunawara Justice Group has been working a lot in with the anti-courts and Naja, including now that Bunawara has a MOU with the Community Justice Center, and it's still in force. And that's one thing good, that we are able to extend our assistance to other areas where we can fit in, to be able to assist and help others who need assistance.
Can I ask quickly 2 questions? The Bunawara Justice Group is that part of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement Law and Justice Groups, or is it separate? That's question number 1. I'll give you the second question as well. Is there any opportunity for the various law and justice groups in the Northern Territory to meet and discuss issues?
Your Honor, I think I would ask my friend Mr. SP would be the perfect expert to maybe simplify that question to me.
Giving evidence from here, Your Honour, I'll have to try and leave some reminders that might help us answer that. But
Yeah.
we, prior to COVID, Nadia had done some work, you recall, with Bunawara around, as you said, an MOU between our services. We had planned a network of law and justice groups to try and meet on occasions to share the knowledge and the lessons that each other in different communities do. Recall those conversations.
Yes.
And part of that, part of that was the valuable experience of your fellow Bunawara members attending to Darwin and giving evidence at the Royal Commissioner meeting, the Warri elders. And
Yes,
the meetings that they had during that time to share their ideas with each other.
Yeah, I wasn't available at the Royal Commission, but the two of my members were present, and I think Nadia gave me a link to watch the live stream on computer. So Kumanjayi was there, and there's three justice groups, I think, Your Honor. One's the Punky from Melville Island, and there's Kumanjayi, and there's Bunawara. Unfortunately, Your Honor, sometimes we don't have the funding or the budget so that we could gather to meet and share this information, how we can, move forward as a community, and how we could, engage with different organizations.
Do you think it would be beneficial if the groups were able to meet?
Yes, Your Honor. Maybe sometimes, when we have the budget, because Bunawara, we in West Arnhem Land, and Ponky is in the Melville Islands, and the Kumanjayi, I think they're in Lajamano. So maybe, if we have the funding, we could sort of get the three groups together to meet somewhere, maybe in Alice Springs or maybe up in West Arnhem where good fishing, huh? So I think that's, Your Honor, is a good idea, but maybe, funding wise is, where could we get the funding and how many people would attend the conference?
And just to clarify, Bunawara doesn't get funding, you don't get paid.
No, we don't get paid. We're just a community group, community group, which we extend our group of members from different, ceremonial groups like the Gunabibi mob, the other ceremonial groups. These are the members that make up, the Bunawara, the ceremonial lawmen, male and female.
And with the 12 clan groups in Maningrida, whilst you probably assisted in the reference letter being from many of those clans, you don't necessarily speak for everybody in the community.
Yes.
Only when offenders or people seeking your advice.
Yes. Some of the reference letter that we write is we have members in the community who speak, like maybe Gunubiji language, and she speaks Gunubiji. She can also understand Rambaranga, and she can speak Burara, and she speaks English as a fourth language. Some of the people, in the Bunawara Justice Group, their English is their fifth or sixth language, and these are the people sometimes that, in customary law meetings or wherever there is meetings in the community that, we have mediators to mediate the meeting and to see that, all goes well. Or even sometimes when there is bush court sittings in the community, Nadia is always there if Bunawara is available to do letters to the presiding judge, and we are always there to help Nigel.
And that includes often working till 11 or 12 o'clock at night.
Yeah, enjoying that Johnny cakes, eh?
And,
And now where Johnny is gone.
and perhaps just to clarify, Your Honour, the reference given by Ms Little is not in relation to Bunawara. Just on that, there has been some discussion in the community about a different or separate law and justice group, but that's not.
Does it have to be
Yeah.
separate though? Is there an opportunity for the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, I think, to work with the existing groups?
From my perspective, yes, Your Honour, there has been discussions around that, but it's not happening at this stage. And just one final question in relation to the work of Bunawara. Not only do you like the reference, but it's quite often people from territory families will come and consult with you and engage around issues with families, finding kinship carers and family members to assist with child protection matters.
Yes, Bunawara had, after the Royal Commission, the recommendations out of the outcome from the Royal Commission was that Bunawara Justice Group be the frontliners in the community with children and families. We thought that, bringing back the kids into the community, they can, speak their language, speak their mother's language and their father's language. They can learn their grandfather's language. So building that relationship so that the child can, learn the father's side and the mother's side, and that we could keep the kids in the community, rather, because there was one time a young fella in the community, he was 18 years old, and he speaks a little bit of language, but most of the time speaks English. And one time he was in tears when he spoke to me, and I said, "No, it's not your problem. Sometimes these things happen."
And without naming that person, he was someone that had returned after being in care outside of the community.
Yes, outside of the community for so long, until he was 18. And I said, it's not your fault. It's the way things, how it works in the system. But as long as you are back in the community, you will slowly have to learn. It'll take years and years. Sometimes it takes years and years for kids to learn that language, the mother's tongue or the father's language, or the grandmother's or the grandfather's language. And it takes years and years and years. And they slowly start to learn, they start to pick up that language, the pronunciation or the retroflex or the name of the animals or the plants or the marines, fish and whatever. Slowly learn, but these things happen, and we've been writing that letters to territorial families and starting to build that what I call kinship connections, in the community, where territorial family and the justice group in Manungara, engage how we can move forward as a community, how we can, share knowledge and, build that bridge together in the community, so that our kids can learn, our culture and also Balanda culture.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honour, those are my questions.
Yes. Other questions?
No,
Yes.
I'll ask some questions if I may, Your Honour.
Yes.
My name's McMahon, and I act for the Parampuru Committee of Yundamu, which is a justice committee. And firstly, may I say thank you for your statements, all three of them, but Mr Schumacher, you'll appreciate it, particularly to Mr Pascoe and Mr Graderix, which these statements were simply so educational and very, very valuable for us to read. So thank you very much. I only have a couple of questions. Mr Pascoe, if I could start with you. There's been quite a bit of evidence about the intervention in the inquest, and looking at your statement, you were a policeman from 2005, and one of the issues that's come up is about the relationship between the police and the community and respect. And I wonder if you could just give us an idea of what it was like to be a policeman at the time of the intervention and how that affected respect between the community and the police, if you're able to talk about that.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. In my time as a Aboriginal community police officer, I was wearing two hats. One was a community police officer hat, and one was an elder hat. And in the anti-police force, when we were a three-man station, there was the OSC, the constable, and myself, which was the ACPO, Aboriginal Community Police Officer. I was the person who was in the front line. I spoke very clearly to the RYC, and I said, this is my community. I know how things work here. This is another culture, back to front. This is my yard. So whatever we do in the community, it's a good idea to learn from each other. Things that maybe you don't understand, I can answer, or sometimes that I don't understand, you can answer. And during that, the Northern Territory intervention, I think the good thing that I've learned in the intervention, that it helped me, gain more confidence and skills so that I can, be a good manager as an ACPO in my own community, to be able to, bridge and build that network as an ACPO to the anti-police force, and we didn't have much trouble. I didn't have much trouble, and I went along very well with the intervention, and I did state clear to my OIC that we are a team. We have the same goals, and cultural communication in my community is very, very important, because culture is practiced day and night, that we understand. If you're not sure, ask me. I'm the cultural expert, so I can show you the do's and the don'ts. And it's one thing that cultural awareness. I was doing cultural awareness on site with my OSC and the constables, and teaching them my culture, and did real life situation cultural awareness when we were on patrols in the field.
All right, thank you very much. Mr Graderix, may I ask you a question? One of the issues that the Parrampuru Committee has raised in the inquest is addressing the question of police using dogs. And we have been putting forward the idea that police should never use dogs to grab human beings, to grab them, and that will often lead to biting them and so on. And one of the reasons that that's especially important in the Northern Territory is that most of the people who are arrested are in fact Aboriginal people. And so we've been arguing that the dog policy is particularly bad policy because where it allows dogs to be used in arrests and so on, because it's so regularly used against Aboriginal people. And they're the ones getting grabbed by the dogs. Is that something that you have an opinion on, that you could talk about?
Oh, absolutely, I've got an opinion on. I think it's abhorrent. The fact is, these dogs, when you see them being trained up by the police officer, they're biting the officer. They'll be fully, the dog is biting, right? So it's probably more than likely instinct that the dog is going to. So if you're hunting someone, i.e. they've stolen a car and you're using a dog to trail, there's probably a good chance that the dog's going to find the man before the actual officer does, and the person is going to get bitten. So I think it's inhumane. That's my personal opinion. There's got to be better means and ways than a dog being used. I mean, if you're looking for a lost person in the bush, it's very applicable, you know, because you're not hunting anybody down. You're actually doing a search and you're trying to find somebody. Dogs are magnificent for that role, but to actually hunt somebody down, I'm not for it. That's my opinion.
All right, thank you very much. If Your Honour pleases.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, Your Honour. My name's Paddy Coleridge and I work for the coroner. I don't have too many questions for you, but I suspect that the questions that I do have are questions that don't have easy answers. It's been really refreshing to listen to all of you, and I think that communities that you've served and in different ways continue to serve are really lucky to have you and to have had you. Thank you. Listening to all of you, it sounds a lot like good community-based policing involves partnership between Yapa and Kadia, between Yolngu and Ballina. Spraderix, I don't know the names for. Yeah. I wanted to start with you, Acting Superintendent Schumacher, and to get, I suppose, your perspective on the importance of the cultural awareness or the insights that you've gotten over the many years that you've worked in remote communities with either Aboriginal members of the Northern Territory Police Force or just community members who've worked alongside you.
I suppose from my point of view, I was fairly blessed in that Kumanjayi, Jabarua Curtis was at Yondamu for more than 20 years and evolved from the tracker role into the police aid role to the ACPO role. So to be honest, he was my cultural leader. And even when I left working in community and began working in crime and CID in the late 90s, I would still contact Jabarua, call him. The family don't get upset with me, but and you know, talk to him and seek his guidance. And he was a quiet, unassuming man in a lot of ways, but very strong in his culture, and certainly a significant leader amongst his community. So I used him. So
I think Mr. Greatorex used the word intel when you were talking about your wardens. Does that sound familiar to you? In your
well, absolutely. He was all of those roles, and to be honest, as Mr. Greatorex used his wardens, Jabarua and I would wander around the vicinity of the community at night looking for alcohol that had come in, and he was an amazing tracker, so we'd find the alcohol before. Generally what had happened is they'd purchase an Alice, drop it in outside the community, and go into the community, pick people up and go out bush, and we'd intervene. So, and just stopping alcohol coming into the community made such a huge difference.
So that intel, I mean, you're talking about investigating offences, but was the intel sometimes helpful when, for example, you're trying to think about where someone should go on bail, you know, which outstation, which houses, where the problem might be? fund that intel or information sharing with local Aboriginal people. I'm sorry, Mr. Pascoe, original people. Was that
Thank you.
intel and information sharing important there?
Yeah. To be honest, I think Carlos or Naja had more of a role in that. Realistically, they'd be the people that have come up with options for that. Generally, bars within the community. I mean, the outstation movement, there's certainly, when I was there in the 90s, was languishing a little. I think from the little understanding that I have with regards to you and Demo in that environment, I think it's languished even more since. So I'm not sure with that specific community how it would work, but I'm sure there's other communities throughout the Northern Territory where it's much stronger and would be much more relevant.
Mr. Pascoe, you mentioned Bunabibi and ceremony for Yonu. Do you think that, telling the police, telling courts, giving them information about things like the ceremonies that are going on could be an important part of the role of Aboriginal police officers, so that there are options that don't involve sending people to jail or sending people into town to rehab?
In our the character reference letters, when we writing letters to the presiding judge, we talk about there are other alternatives, like in the community, maybe sometimes like, up in the Northern Territory, out on the top end, we have wet season and dry season. This morning, my friend sitting next to me said, "Do you know what summer is?" I don't know what summer is. We only got wet season and dry season up in the top end. So in the wet season times, when people are still at their own outstations or their homelands, when we write the character support letters to the presiding judge saying that maybe it's a good idea for Peter, Paul, and Mary to reside at this outstation for the rest of the remaining 4 months until the early dry, and very often that the presiding judge will say, yes, I think that's a good idea, or even every calendar seasons, every dry season there's a ceremonial calendar season where ceremonies are on, especially in the top end and maybe here in the Central Desert, and we say to the judge that maybe it's a good idea that the young silly kids can maybe attend to the ceremony for 6 months, or sometimes some ceremonies goes for a year, and let the trees, let the rocks be their prison walls instead of the steel metals in prison. And out of that sometimes we have good outcomes, and I think that's probably a culturally appropriate option for how we can get kids or people out from prisons, bring them back to the community where we can talk to them, guide them, put them back in the community, put them in track. And that's one thing good that we've learned to, and we worked when my retired old friend Mr. Greg Kavanagh was the judge, and I want to thank him for the information that he shared with us and the information that we shared with him. And that's something that we learned, as Bunawara Justice Group, writing that support letters for to the presiding judge. And sometimes, we put in a lot of good stories, just like John Rainbow, when the general is John Rainbow chipping the statue, And the army general says, we're just only chipping the statue. That's what we just chipped away the statue. The statue is always there, but we're just chipping away the refuges. And things like that we understand, especially in the law system, how can we do engage with the law system culturally appropriately for this individual, female or male. How do we build that bridge together? And that's one thing good is that writing the character support letters to the presiding judge.
The second kind of topic I wanted to ask you about was, really follows on from something you were saying, Mr. Greatorex, about Aboriginal people want ownership of the issues and they want ownership of the solutions. And that's a message we've heard time and time again over the last 6 months. The sense we get from all three of you is that Aboriginal people want to work with the police, either as constables or in other roles. I wanted to ask each of you whether you have any thoughts, ideas about how we support more Aboriginal people to become members of the Northern Territory Police Force, either constables or APLOs or APOs. Perhaps if I just start with you, Mr. Greatorex, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought is it has to start at the schools. Why don't you have a proactive community legal education about being a police officer through your schooling system? So you possibly may start at year 8 or you might start at year 10. And then you run through the processes. So if you get to year 12, do you go and enter into a traineeship? So what we're talking about is pathways, Sometimes we'll place a young Aboriginal man or woman in a job where they learn to get job ready. They learn to appreciate that they have to get up at 8 o'clock and they have set hours to work. And then that's part of that pathway. So police departments have to think about what pathways do we need to develop and set in to try to get more Aboriginal men and women into the service. Now, the actual serving men and women that we already have in the Northern Territory, or WA for that matter, they play a key role in this. So the consultation's got to start from within the black staff. Don't impose it from the outside. Let the ownership come from the actual Aboriginal staff. Let it be their idea and their concept and get them to run it with support surrounding them. And then say, so, this idea about these APLOs meeting and forums annually or whatever, there's your starting point. As a group of Aboriginal who are already serving, what do you guys think? How can we get more? Rather than a white inspector in charge of Aboriginal affairs with his little group around him, you go direct to the staff that already work and they've got years of experience. So that's my suggestion, is start from within. We're doing that now as an Aboriginal practice leader with child protection. We now have this Aboriginal employment network in place, and we're going to the crux of what are the issues that are affecting Aboriginal children, and we want less Aboriginal kids in care. The solution finding has to start with our Aboriginal staff. We live our culture daily, and we live in the community. We have the solutions, so start scratching and digging at the staff that you've already got. They've got the solutions for you. And of course, it has to be collectively done. They have to be given the resources to make it happen.
Acting Superintendent, I accept that the last answer really emphasises the importance of starting with existing Aboriginal staff.
I confess actually that as my friends here were talking, I recalled the Mount Theo project, which actually kicked off in the 90s when I was out there, so which the Brown family was certainly integral in kicking off, and that was somewhere where I believe young offenders were failed to at times, and I'm pretty certain that that's not up and running at the moment, and hasn't been for quite some period of time, but that was very effective.
In terms of things that, I guess I'm directing this to your experience as a non-Aboriginal police officer who's worked in remote Indigenous communities, do you have ideas for things that non-Aboriginal members of the police force might do to encourage Aboriginal people to join them as police officers?
25 years ago, we had a school-based constable that was based in Urara College that went around all of the remote communities actually engaging with the kids. At probably 8 or 10 in, I think, which was called the DARE program, which was a drug and alcohol awareness program of some sort. I never had much to do with it, but that was early interactions with kids, which I think is critical.
Sounds like, and just harking back to some of the stories you've told us about being a young fella, the best advertisements for the Northern Territory Police Force are Aboriginal police officers who engage with kids.
Yeah, with Western Australia we had Constable Care. Constable Care's project
Yeah, quite similar.
might have been similar to yours, and Constable Care was prominent in schools. Now, I haven't had Constable Care mentioned at all. I think it's another community development project that got pushed aside by the last commissioner, and he wanted all these men at the forefront, on the front line at the loss of community policing. And we've been chasing our tails in Western Australia for the last 10 years as a result of that. And now we've come back and we've appointed community liaison officers to fill all the gaps of the APLOs we've lost.
Might do some following up and find out what happened there after we break. But the second half of the question, so if the first half of the question is, okay, getting people into the police force, the second half of the question has to be, how do we support Aboriginal people to stay?
They have to get that support from within themselves as a group for starters. And that's what we're doing now in child protection, is we're looking at our staff and us surrounding one another. If you get a sense of mateship within your job, you'll stick around when it's hard, because resilience is so important. Resilience is the ability to, you know what, I've got to tough this out. It's really, really hard for me right now, but I've got to tough it out. And if you've got fellow Aboriginal workers alongside you, encouraging you, mentoring you, and you've got to have this mentoring. Sometimes mentoring is just not in certain police stations. I was very fortunate to be mentored by Col Murray, Sergeant at the time. The guy was awesome as a mentor. So you've got to have a mentor program in there so we can maintain. You know, you have a supervisor who has that ability to check in once a week. How's my Indigenous worker going? What are your plans for the next 3 years? What are your plans for the next 5? Do they identify that this young Aboriginal guy coming through is fully switched on? Let's channel him. Let's look at what development plan we can come up to. I was very, very fortunate in the Western Australian Police Service to bump into 2 guys that guided me that way. They were awesome. They came up with a development plan.
Is there a police union in Western Australia?
There is.
Do you feel like that was much of a source of support for Aboriginal police officers during your time?
I think so. I felt supported by my police union. And of course, you know, as a police officer, you're always getting complaints against you, and our union were there to support us in those instances. But I had no issue with my WA police union, and they were. I sensed that they too always wanted more Aboriginal workers.
Acting Superintendent, any thoughts on supporting Aboriginal people to stay long term within the Northern Territory Police Force in whatever role?
Yeah, look, I'd hark back to, I agree with Mr. Grayback's words entirely, but I also think that the correct program that we've started, or that has been started in the Northern Territory, I think it's going great guns, and I think that there's a lot of support internally within that program, and a lot externally. So those of us that have worked in remote communities understand that importance, understand that the need to support your Indigenous staff. Am I allowed to use that word? Indig, is that all right?
That is okay.
Thank you.
Just have one more question, and I'll direct it to you, Mr. Pascoe, because I know that you've really worked in communities where you have strong cultural and family ties. We've heard some evidence during the inquest that although those cultural and family ties most of the time are a real asset, they help Indigenous police officers. Sometimes it can make the work a bit hard if it's close family or, you know, there's boys and cousins, you know, if someone's wrong skin for you. How did you manage that when you were a police officer in Maningrida?
Yeah. When before I was a police officer, Aboriginal community police officer, I was a night patrol coordinator, and the stuff that I was doing in the community, running that night patrol program, there was no ACPOs, but there was police aides and the police trackers in the community. And the officer in charge was, you know, looking at how I was, you know, managing the night patrol crew. I had morning shifts, I had evening shifts, and some of the stuff that I was doing was the work of a Aboriginal community police officer or a police tracker or a police aide. And then he said, you know, you're a coordinator, but the stuff that you are doing in the community looks like a police officer doing in our community. Why don't you come and join in, you know, join the police force? And I said, that's a big step to join the anti-police force. I gotta have to, you know, think about it, talk to my elders, talk to my family, because once I'm a police officer, I gotta use the policeman hat. And when I'm sleeping, I'm gonna use a father hat. I'm gonna use a grandfather or an elder's hat, a community hat. And this is the kind of conflict of interest that before, you know, kids work readiness in the community, before they enter into employment, especially the anti-police force, they have to understand the roles and the responsibilities, and how do you as an individual, you know, what do you expect out of that, you know, because you can live in a Balanda world and a Yulmo world. You're gonna even live in both worlds, and you're gonna have to balance the world in you, and the power that you're gonna have to use police power to arrest people, and the authority in your customary law as an elder. And these are the things that when I went through was, you know, a challenge, you know, in the community. And not only that, but it also taught me, working in the police force taught me how to be, you know, a good manager. How could I manage? You know, this is learning the Abalanda culture now. Was a big step, learning how to manage, you know, my own family or being, you know, how could I be a role model in the community so that I can get the next generation. If I did this, you can do it, you know. It only needs this trust, and then make sure that, you know, you speak to the leaders, the Jungai, the elders, and your parents. Let them know, because it's going to be a big challenge and a big step in, you know, you as an individual.
So you've talked quite a bit about, you know, beyond the police officer, learning about Balanda authority, trying to work out that conflict of interest, if there's conflict. Acting superintendent, do you think that there's also some work to be done educating non-Indigenous police officers about Yolnu or Yapa culture so that they can understand the potential conflicts for Aboriginal police officers?
Well, hopefully they'll pick that up during the time that they're actually working with people. And certainly the colleagues that I've worked with over the years have understood that and accepted that and acknowledged that it's a stressful role. It's a difficult role. It's a role working, you know, across culture. It's a tough job. It's a tough gig. I understand that absolutely, and without the family support and without the community support, it's a very difficult job to do. But certainly with the colleagues that I've worked over the years, I think they've well understood exactly what it takes to do that role and do it competently.
Is it the kind of thing in the training college where you need to get, people in the constable training role, which at the moment are predominantly, we probably don't have that many Aboriginal people going through the constable course, but I know there are some. But to get the constables and the ALOs and ACPOs together in that kind of training module to kind of talk about those issues, conflict and how to resolve and how to communicate well with each other.
Your Honour, I believe that that's occurring. I believe there is certainly some cross-cultural education that's occurring.
Sure, I'm just not sure if it's done
But-
together with it amongst those groups.
But
Someone will be able to tell me. Maybe it's already happening. I don't know.
We'll let you know about that, Sean.
I think, Your Honour, it's happening, but it's in a limited capacity. So, and realistically, it's not something that's picked up in a week or a day.
No,
It's
but
time.
being aware, there's that glimmer of awareness, and also being aware about the need to communicate openly around those issues, not to tiptoe around them or make assumptions.
Your Honour, I'm aware that Senior Constable Brad Wallace went up to the latest recruit course and produced a lecture and was up there for several days. So I'm not sure who else was amongst that time, but I can attest to that within the last 6 weeks he was up there.
I definitely see that there could be a prospect for that peer-to-peer learning.
Yes.
Mr. Gregory, as someone who's the ORC of the station, working with wardens who, live in and are connected to the station, was that an issue you saw from time to time?
Absolutely.
And how did you manage it?
I would have to be aware of the conflicts, give the staff the confidence that they can actually sit down and tell me that, because sometimes that's the hardest bit for them. It's their pride.
You think people were ashamed talking
Yeah,
about
they're ashamed to talk about. But that's why that may be the guy who took me through law. I can't go there, but by building that relationship, maintaining and being truthful and honest to them, that they'll have that capacity to sit down and tell you, I can't go there. I can't deal with that one. So again, it's all about that relationship building.
one of those many questions?
Are there any other questions? Can I say how much we appreciate you all coming, and not in the least because you also brought humour to some very long sitting days where we've been listening to very difficult issues, and the humour that you've brought in relation to some of your experiences and stories shows or demonstrates, I think, that there is a real warmth and a willingness to engage as human beings and move forward together, and I really appreciate you all coming today.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Do we need to discuss anything further before we adjourn? And otherwise we'll be communicating about our next start date and 9:30 sharp.
9:30 sharp on the 31st of July.
All right, we'll adjourn.
Hang on.